Hello, welcome to What to Expect from a Penetration Test. A brief introduction of myself. My name is Chris Maddalena. You can find me as C Maddalena most places where I am particularly active, which is really IRC, GitHub, and Twitter. Professionally, I'm an information security consultant, and that can really apply to just about anything in the security field. My specific specialization right now is red team, which means I do penetration testing. I do phishing campaigns where I actually attempt to phish the employees of my clients. And then I often follows up with traveling around and doing security training where I talk about social engineering, phishing, malware, certain attacks, things like that, to try to improve, results of future phishing campaigns. I'm also one of the co-hosts of the PVC Security Podcast, and I am an active member of MISEC, the Michigan Security Group. I like to give those guys a shout out whenever I can, because if you are in the Michigan area or anywhere near Jackson, Michigan, or the Southfield Royal Oak area, definitely come out if you can. Two different groups. We have meetings in Jackson and Southfield, both once a month, so 2 meetings. And even if you're not a security person, these are really great talks. We have development talks, we have security talks, we have business talks, and it's just a cool group of people to hang out with. So to kick things off, I want to tell a brief story. This happened about a year ago. Some friends of mine who happen to be web developers mentioned they were having a pen test done. We talked about it a bit, and I learned that they really had no understanding of what a pen test was and what it meant to have one, or what was going to be done. So we talked about it a bit, but that conversation kind of died until about a month later, when they got the results back. And these results were really lackluster, very disappointing. They came in one morning, and there was just basically a memo on their desk that was a list of words. It was a list of vulnerabilities. It would appear, gone into the report, kind of filtered it out, taken just the names of the vulnerabilities, put them into a list, and passed them on. Now, you may have never seen a full penetration test report. A lot goes into these, and I don't just mean a lot of work. I mean a lot of words go into these. We typically break down each vulnerability into every little detail about it. We give the severity rating, the CVSS score, which is another kind of severity rating. Like a critical might be a CVS score of 9 out of 10. And we have a description of the vulnerability. We have notes from the tester. We have recommendations on how to fix it. We have evidence that shows you that we did indeed verify it existed and what it looks like when it's reproduced. We have steps of how to reproduce the problem, or explanations of how it impacts the business. When you strip all of that away, all you have are words that have no context. They have no real meaning anymore. And unfortunately, that meant that these developers and their manager had no context at all to work with. So when it came time to actually trying to carry out the request to fix those things, nothing really happened, because no one was going to give these guys the time they needed to fix them, the resources they needed. No one wanted to take a developer off another project to fix these problems, because they had no idea how serious they were. In some cases, they had no idea what the vulnerability even was. It was kind of a mess. And it was very disappointing for me to hear that, because on one hand, it's always disappointed to imagine that maybe the work that I do ends up like that at a company, and nothing can be done about it. Because it is always disappointing for a tester to come back a year later, for like the annual pen test or whatever, and find the same problems. it is really kind of demoralizing, and it's demoralizing for both sides, really. The tester doesn't really want to write up the same problem yet again, and certainly the developers, I'm sure, don't want to keep being told that the problem is there, because they probably didn't forget. So hopefully this talk will explain what a penetration test is and help you better prepare for a penetration test, and provide some context for what a test is and how it's carried out and what the results mean. So what better place to start than actually discuss what a penetration test is? So I mentioned the term red team earlier. In the security field, we often use the term red team and blue team. So red team is offense, blue team is defense. Penetration testing is considered red team. Red teaming has a long history, and it's the idea of red teaming is kind of originated in the military, and then they took it from even further back. There's a long history of it. It is actually a very valuable business tool, and in this case, it's security professionals using special tools, their own knowledge of how to use those tools, and a lot of creativity to try to break things, whether it be networks, web applications, or maybe people through social engineering. And the result, hopefully, is a very detailed, nicely laid out report of all the findings and a analysis written from an attacker perspective. Speaking of that perspective, this is a very simplified version of the attacker's methodology and how basically how a penetration test works, the different phases. You're always going to start off with a discovery phase. This is, as I kind of say here on the slide, host hide and seek. Typically, as a tester, I'm given a list of IP addresses. There could be 2 or 3, there maybe 1 or hundreds of IP addresses, however many the client has. And they could tell me, hey, all of these are live, go here. But they might own ranges. And as a tester, we also want to find anything the client doesn't know is available externally or internally. Because, sometimes servers are taken down and they're not actually taken down. It's just someone marked that task as done. It's still just sitting there. Things like that can happen. So we always start off trying to find everything that's out there, every live host we can find. Once we know what hosts are living and accessible, we move on to the enumeration phase. And this is where we're going to try to find all of the ports and services running on those live hosts and get the versions of those services so that we can begin comparing those versions and names of the services to vulnerabilities that we know of, depending on the services that are available, that would change how we attack it. And that's what happens in the next phase. The scanning phase here is where we begin actually trying to interact with the hosts in different ways. This may be using scanners like Zap, Nessus, and Burp to scan web applications and hosts to look for vulnerabilities, or something like Derb, which is a tool that tries to find all different web pages that might be like port 80 or 443 in a web app or website, things like that. We're trying to find as much as possible on each host, so that then we can pick an avenue to go down and move on to exploitation. Now you can see this arrow going all the way back to discovery. Penetration testing works in a big loop. So if we hit a dead end, or we take a vulnerability as far as we can take it, we go back to the beginning, we choose a new path, and we try to break things a different way. We want to be as thorough as we can. This is actually very similar to the SDLC. When you're beginning development on a new application, you're given the requirements, your restrictions, you're told what you need to accomplish, and then you move on to design and development, where this is kind of like enumeration. All right, so you have your list of requirements, you know what your constraints are, and you look at all the options available within those constraints. And eventually, you put it together, you develop it, you have a plan, and you test it. And the app goes into QA testing, and this is where software development actually becomes very similar to pen testing in a way. I was talking to a developer here at CodeMash by the name of Jimmy Bird, who's also kind enough to co-host a bonus episode of the PVC security podcast that I recorded at CodeMash. And on that podcast, on that episode, he apologized to me before stating that he thought pen testing was really sort of glorified QA testing. And I wasn't offended at all. There was no need for the apology because I actually agree. Really, QA testing is what pen testing is, and pen testing is QA testing. The only difference I would say is that pen testing is often QA testing to the extreme. We don't stop and write up a ticket when we find a bug. We take that bug and we try to use it to break the application hard. We want to take that to an extreme that a QA tester probably would not. And also we have time and resources to dedicate to this that a QA tester probably doesn't. So we are QA testers. We want just something else a little bit different. And this is where these two things diverge, where in the SDLC, you're hoping to eventually implement a working functional web app or application. And on the pen testing side, we're hoping to find a bug and break it even more. And to do that, we have a variety of tools available to us. At the basic level, we have Kali Linux. Kali is a version of Debian that comes with most of the popular security tools pre-installed. It's a really awesome starting point for any security toolkit. It's one of the preferred testing platforms for a lot of people. And it's totally free. It's maintained by Offensive Security. The other cool thing, too, is if you want to play around with any of these tools we're going to talk about today, Offensive Security offers VirtualBox and VMware machines for Kali Linux. Just download it. They're like 3 to 4 gigabytes. Import them into VMware VirtualBox, and you're ready to go. They even have the tools for VMware and VirtualBox pre-installed, and everything is literally set up and ready for you to go. Pen testers also use vulnerability scanners. There are free and open source ones like OpenVAS. There's paid for ones like Tenables, Nessus, and Rapid7's Nexpose. Now, what makes these kind of special is that they do something really cool. They send out packets to find live hosts and then use some of the responses to various types of packets to determine things like the operating system version, patch level, what services are installed. If we're scanning, for example, internal computers, it can start querying things like group policy and applications that are installed and their versions to then compare all of that information against a huge database of known vulnerabilities to give you a good idea of what each host is vulnerable to and what needs to be done to bring it up to snuff. Now you might be wondering why there's multiple of these, and why there would be a market for them and not just one that you used. Well, actually, if you ran all three of these tools against the same group of computers, you would probably get slightly different results from each one. It's not because one of them did it badly or something does it quite different. It's just kind of the nature of vulnerability scanners. You will get false positives, and it'll miss some things. So that's why it's important for the vulnerability tester, or pen tester rather, to go in and verify the findings. But vulnerability scanners give us a really good kind of jump start to a pen test. Then there's proxies. I really, really love proxies. We're going to talk a bit more of these. If you are someone who attended Monica Moro's talk at CodeMash, you will have learned a whole lot about Burp and Zap but we're going to talk a bit more about those later. And these are just really cool because they let you do things like scan web applications, watch in real time the GET requests and responses from the server, all kinds of really neat things. And we'll take a look at those in a minute. And then there's other types of scanners like Nmap, Network Mapper, that will do something actually kind of similar to what the vulnerability scanners do, scanning a list of IP addresses to find live hosts, and can even do things like get their operating system version, things like that, to look for what ports are open. And there's scanners like SQL Map. SQL Map's a cool tool that I'll do a demo of later that attempts to find SQL injection opportunities and can actually automatically perform SQL injection. And then there's Recon Tools. These are also really important. And these are tools just like search engines like Google and Shodan. They help us gather information about our target before we begin, so we have a better idea of what we're going up against. And that's where I want to start looking at. The Recon tools are used for passive intelligence gathering, often referred to as OSINT, or open source intelligence. These tools are a big reason why we can't rely on obscurity for security. If you've ever thought that your server at home isn't really vulnerable because no one's ever going to find it, it's not really true anymore. That was kind of true at one point, but now just about anyone can find anything on the on the internet. We have tools available to us to let us just actually stumble into things. People that are up to mischief, security researchers, etc. Any of these people can just actually stumble across opportunities to steal data, cause problems. This is how actually some of the data breaches are discovered. We're actually going to look at an example of that here in just a couple of minutes related to MongoDB. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's talk about Shodan. Now, unfortunately, we're not going to look at or talk about the Shodan from System Shock, but the Shodan that we use is actually pretty cool. So Shodan.io is a self-described search engine for the Internet of Things. It's kind of like Google, only instead of giving you web pages and files, it reveals services and servers. It's totally free to use, but they do have a subscription option that opens up more advanced queries, more filters, and they also have an API that you can use with scripts and tools so that they can tap into the Shodan search engine. If you want a premium subscription, it's not too hard to get it. It was just $5 on Black Friday, for example. So it's actually not that expensive for what you're getting. At its base level, we can do things just like searching for Amazon.com, searching for a domain. That's what I did here. It's kind of cool. We can see Amazon.com's various IP addresses assigned to these servers. We can see some neat information like where they are in the world, the services they're running, but not super interesting. There's still a lot to go through here. So we can narrow it down. For example, we can search for SQ webcam servers. And so Shodan found 415 of these, these are just webcams that are available on the internet that you could connect to and watch their feed. Now, there's a good chance that some of these aren't showing anything interesting. Maybe they're just someone's backyard surveillance camera. That could be, a privacy problem, but not that big of a deal. Maybe it's a camera just watching puppies, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's things like this. Webcam servers that people have set up at their home for rather clever ideas, like watching their RSA keys so that they don't have to carry them with them, or never have to worry about forgetting them when they need the code. They probably never expected anyone would find these and be able to watch them except for them. And there's stuff like this that you can find where things start to get a little bit more mischievous, if not downright malicious. So I don't actually have a Shodan link for this one, but a friend of mine posted this on Twitter, and I thought it was kind of a perfect introduction to the next slide. So if you're unfamiliar with Telnet, it's something you really shouldn't be using, but it was not only open. It was, the port was not only open on this particular server, but it was allowing unauthenticated access. And the last time Shodan tried to come through and scan it, it actually got a connection refused because too many people were connected to the server. More than likely, that's not what the owner of the server would want. There's probably not so many people legitimately using it that you would get this response. So before I switch to this next slide, there was a situation with MongoDB recently, and it's still ongoing, where a kind of part-time, I don't want to call them amateur because that makes it sound kind of derogatory, but so we'll say part-time security researcher named Chris Vickery asked a good question. It was just a question that no one else was asking, which was, I wonder how many MongoDB databases are available on the internet. And he asked this question because up through the initial release of version 3 of MongoDB, which isn't that old, MongoDB was by default listening on its default ports for external connections and did not require authentication. Eventually, Mongo fixed this with a update for version 3 that made it so that the default was no longer listening externally, but just listening on localhost. Well, they didn't want to change your config, of course, in case you were actually using that feature. So they didn't change anyone's config. But it seems like, at least as a possibility, that many people were confused and thought that they were okay and didn't need to change anything. So this time, Chris Vickery and some others who have been out there looking as well have been able to find over 35,000 MongoDB databases that are available externally, just out there on the internet. And that can lead to things like this. This is one of the 35,000. And if you're familiar with Mongo, you'll know that 80 megabytes is about the size of an empty database. And we can see the reason for that isn't because this just wasn't in use or a fresh install. It's because someone actually came by, found this, and did this. Changed, they apparently deleted the database and changed the name of the, perhaps a new database to deleted because you didn't password protect your MongoDB. So this is why it's really important to be aware of this stuff. If something gets misconfigured or you leave something open, just for a minute, because it's really just much easier than setting up authentication or something like that. Understand that it is possible someone could just literally stumble into it, find it on Shodan, that sort of thing. Moving on, I want to look at Google hacking. So this is a lot like Shodan in a way, but we can start looking at things like files. So Google's already done all the hard work for us. They've gone out, they've indexed everything that's publicly available, and they've made a bunch of really cool keywords available to Google users. So for example, we can use the keywords in text and file type to search for files and their contents. We can use the keyword in URL to look for strings that we know are in the addresses for like webcams, router administration pages, things like that. And if you were in Dave Kennedy's talk on Thursday, you may have heard him say that one of the first things he does during a pen test is Google the site domain in URL ASP. You might not have understood what he meant. This is what he was talking about. So he uses the site keyword to restrict all the searches down to a specific domain, and then he searches in URL ASP to try to see if there's any classic ASP pages that he can exploit with SQL injection existing on one of the websites owned by and run by that company. So for example, here's a search I did just a couple weeks ago. The very first hit I got for in-text password file type XLS was a networkconfig.xls. I believe this was for like a real estate company, real estate agency, and we can see that Google is kind enough to let me know that the worksheet default name wouldn't change from the default to sheet 1. And we can see that on row 18, the there's router password and the password. Now, obviously, this is kind of funny, but if I wasn't local, it's not really going to do me much good. I'd have to drive out there and find this place, connect to their Wi-Fi. Not good, but maybe not that bad. But, it says router password, and on line 20, we see remote access IP and port. So this suggests that remote access is enabled. They have it set to port 1080. Maybe I can use that password just to log into their router and cause some trouble. You can use these types of things to start finding all kinds of weird stuff on OpenFTP servers. People didn't realize allowed anonymous access, things like that they just didn't know were accessible through their website, or that they had up somewhere for their own convenience that they thought just no one would ever find. Now, you don't always need something as powerful as like Google or Shodan. Although that's not to say these tools aren't powerful in their own right. We can use tools just like whois. A simple whois command can tell us a lot about a target. For example, using whois, I can find a lot of information on perhaps a company's IT department. So maybe I have no idea who is in their IT department, who might be a good phishing victim. Maybe I don't even have email addresses yet. I can use whois. I can see like, all right, the admin is so-and-so, there's their email address. Okay, the registrant is different. And I might get a couple of different people, a couple of different names. And since they're on the domain, I can assume that they might be, they've been in like the marketing department for a while, or in the IT department. And then I just have to look those people up on, say, LinkedIn to figure out what their job title is, maybe how long they've been at the company, to get a good idea of who they are and what they do. And that can give all kinds of different ideas. Knowing that they're involved with the domain and the website can give me some new social engineering pretext ideas. It can be very powerful. Harvester is also great for this. The Harvester harvests email addresses from the internet. It's really simple. You just give it a domain like gmail.com, and you tell it to search like Google, LinkedIn, Bing, for all email addresses from that domain. So I can do, and I will do this in a live demo in a moment, I can search for like CodeMash.org and see if I can find any CodeMash.org email addresses. And then there's services like Have I Been Pwned and Pwned List. Now these are meant to help you. You can go there, enter your email address, and let you know if you're part of a breach. They're really great for pen testers as well as other people that might be looking for your password. So say I have a bunch of email addresses now collected from whois and Harvester and maybe just like LinkedIn and other locations and other tools. And I can put those through Pwned List. And I can see if they were part of like the Adobe breach and things like that. And if their work email address was part of that, or even a private email address, if I can link it up with the person. And if I can get the password, which might not even really be that hard, I can see if that password will still work for a work account, because maybe they changed the password for Adobe or whatever was breached, but they didn't think that anyone would really ever try it at work, or would know that they worked at this at this company, so they didn't change it. Or maybe it was 5 years ago and it was just a password they kind of always kept in rotation, and it's come back around, or they added a 1 to it, etc. So we can use all this information that we collect from Recon and use it to get some pretty good password guesses and other information. Once we've collected everything that we think we need, that we can get from open source intelligence gathering, we start to move on to the active scanning portion. So, say we've done the discovery phase. We know what we're going after. We have a list of different interesting targets. So we can start using tools like pictured here, WordPress Scanner. So say we found a WordPress blog within our scope. Well, we know that WordPress is often targeted. It's a favorite for people looking for vulnerabilities that they can report, and it gets a lot of attention. It runs a lot of the blogs on the web, so it often has new vulnerabilities that are being discovered quite frequently. And people don't update enough. So WP Scanner leverages all those great vulnerabilities and the ability to actually dig into a WordPress blog, get version numbers and plugins that are installed, etc., and then it'll compare them. This is basically a vulnerability scanner for WordPress blogs. And then we can also use tools like what I mentioned earlier, the MySQL, the SQL map, to do things like scanning locations we think there might be SQL injection. Pictured here, we can see that it found SQL injection and was able to tell us the operating system and the database with MySQL, etc. So I'm going to give a demo of a few of these tools. So we'll swipe over here to my demo VMs. For the demos today, I have the OWASP Broken Web Application Project, BWAP, running in one VM over here, which is just a black screen at the moment. It runs like this when you open it up, in case you ever want to follow along with this. And we can target it with our various tools and browse to it and get all kinds of cool web apps that we can mess with that we know are broken in certain ways. What we're looking at right here is Kali Linux. And this is what I was talking about, where they go through and they really try to make it accessible for someone who's just getting started. They will come in here, and all these tools that you might have heard about that we were talking about today are listed in here kind of under sections of what they're used for. So if you go home and you want to play with this, then this might be very helpful for you to understand how these are applied. Many of these are actually just command line tools. You like Nmap, you'll click them, and it'll open up a terminal window with the help information for the tool. But give Kali a shot. It should be very helpful to you if you have interest in learning more. Getting some hands-on experience will go a long way. So let's take a look at the harvester. Like I said, we're going to run harvester against CodeMash.org, and we're going to have it check Google. So I've actually already run this before, so I know it's not going to find anything sensitive it's already on the CodeMash website. So just from Google, it found info and registration in KidsMash at CodeMash.org. Probably if you're here at CodeMash, you know about those. You might have received emails from those or sent emails there. So not that interesting. But if you were to look for example, go home and try it with your own company's domain, you might be surprised to find your own on that list. And then the harvester will also give you host IPs for various CodeMash.org or whatever domain you give it, addresses that it can find. So there's NodeBots, there's prereqs, there's speakers.codemash, all websites that are probably familiar with you since you're at CodeMash. So let's look at one of the other tools we talked about. So WordPress Scanner. Over here, we have from the Broken Web App Project a WordPress 2.0 blog. Now this is really old. We're in like 4.4 was recently released, so this is really old. It's going to be pretty broken. We also have a couple of broken, outdated plugins installed, the My Gallery 1.2.1. But let's say we came across this on a client's website. It's just some neglected WordPress blog they forgot they even had. We can use WordPress Scanner. It's really simple. All I'm doing is pointing it at the address, and boop, there it goes. Really quick. You can see here that it found the My Gallery plugin. It knows there's remote file inclusion vulnerability. It has links for me to reference, and also exploit DB. If you really want to scare yourself, if you've never looked at any of this, you can go to exploitdb.com. This is a website that is also maintained by Offensive Security. the maintainers of Kali Linux. And this is where proof of concept code or actual functioning exploits are submitted. They vet them with a huge team of volunteers and post them for you to view. So we can actually go to this link, and it would have a exploit that we could use against. Perhaps we'd have to verify that this plugin was installed and not just discovered because of like some leftover files, and actually vulnerable. But this would, if it was vulnerable, give us perhaps step-by-step instructions for exploiting it. And then all kinds of other problems. All these red exclamation points because it's below the latest version or the version that this was vulnerable to. So this is another great way that if I were to come across a WordPress site, it's just a good kickstart to my activities, because often a pen tester has very limited time. Like you might only have a few hours at a time for a testing window, and then you have to kind of sit back and go again later, or maybe that's the one chance you get. It can really depend on the engagement. So you want to try to be as efficient as you can, so these scanners help a lot. But what if it's not WordPress? Well, there's other types of tools, other scanners. Nik2 is an awesome tool. It's very similar to WordPress Scanner, but it's for everything else. Nik2 can be used to scan any website, including WordPress blogs, anything at all. So we're actually going to point Nik2 over to this guy here. This is from the Broken Web App project as well. It's from the Ghost module that has a bunch of different pages. This page in particular, we happen to know is vulnerable to file traversal. It's vulnerable to remote file and local file inclusion vulnerabilities. But, that's a spoiler. Let's say we had no idea. So we're going to run Nik2. All I did was nik2-host and gave it the IP address of this. And already we can see that Nik2 is finding a bunch of vulnerabilities. Scrolling by pretty quick. There it is. So we can see that right here, Nik2 has found what it believes is a vulnerability in PHP nuke rocket add-in that's vulnerable to file traversal, allowing an attacker to view any file on the host. And it says that it's ghost iframe php index.php page equals, which we can see up here looks about right. So we can actually try it. And this is a common thing for PHP. If you're unaware of this, it's something to look into, because it's pretty simple to fix in code, but very powerful if left unfixed. So what these ... slashes mean is basically go up, if you're familiar just with command line commands. So we're just saying go up, go up, go up, go up, go up, and then go into etc and password. PHP, I believe, like you can basically just do 9, so 3, 6, 9. There's kind of a limit to how far it'll actually go up, but usually you just kind of throw in a bunch to go up as high as you can go, and then have it go in. So we can do that, and if we go all the way down, we can see it worked. There's the password file on this system. And if we were actually doing a test, we would, of course, want the shadow password file. We can see if that worked. Unfortunately, we got something, but it probably means that this isn't running as root, which is a very good thing, but it also means that we would have to go back and try something else. But these sorts of vulnerabilities are very powerful for a pen tester, and we're going to talk a bit more about these soon. But just for now, know that that's the sort of thing that these scanners can find, and that's the sort of vulnerability that we like to find, because it lets us do things like that. So speaking of that, we're talking about the OWASP top 10 here. This is some of the stuff that we just looked at. I'm going to assume that you have some knowledge of the OWASP top 10, if you're not just ultimately very familiar with it. There's a lot of talks at CodeMash about the OWASP top 10, so I don't want to beat you over the head with it. I just want to mention that these are really what we're talking about here, because they are penetration tester favorites. The things that OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities allow us to do, the reason they're the top 10 is because they're so powerful, because they can be so dangerous. But not only that, the reason I want to call attention to them here is because they're often targeted by just for sport from random people, or maybe even for potential profit by bug bounty hunters. So these aren't things that you have to look very hard for, and there are people out there actively looking for them whenever they go to just like any website, because they think it might net them a few $100 or so, or a little bit of notoriety if they can notify you about a bug, or maybe they just want to get up some mischief. This matters because it can provide what is commonly referred to as a foothold. As a pen tester or just an attacker, while I can map out the whole external network and I know everything that's there inside and out, if I can't do anything with it, I'm stuck. I need to be able to get some kind of little foothold that I can then start trying to dig in and hopefully find something that's a bit softer of a target that I can really break wide open and get into the internal network. That's the goal. So anything that I can do that will give me access to data or files or let me manipulate things a little bit might get me closer and closer to that goal. So if I were to be able to compromise a web app, even if it's just some little web app that's not important business-wise, it might allow me to manipulate the data or manipulate the app through something like authorization bypass, SQL injection. It might allow me to access the server running the app, and that's a big deal. That's a really big win for trying to get a foothold. And I can do those sorts of things through file inclusion vulnerabilities, like we just saw, being able to view the password file, because I can also use that to view things like config files and anything else that whatever user it is that's running the web app can access. There's also the possibility of just gaining direct control over the server running the app. For example, remote file include vulnerability would let me host perhaps like a backdoor or some sort of malicious file that I can then have the server run by having it execute that file with remote file inclusion. And if I can get, say, a shell connection, I can have it spawn a shell for me or give me some sort of backdoor that lets me more easily poke around and look at files. That's huge. I can do a lot with that. At the very least, it's going to be a really big write-up on the pen test report. Now, it's a little bit different if a malicious hacker gets a hold of a web app and can compromise it. That might actually lead to things that are worse for you than just a check mark on a pen test report. The attacker might actually be able to compromise the app's users, whether those are internal employees or customers, through things like cross-site scripting. Also, I'll mention that from a pen test point of view, things like cross-site scripting and similar vulnerabilities can be used for social engineering. So your own app could be turned against you in a social engineering campaign as part of a pen test. Also, from a definitely purely malicious point of view, there's just destruction or manipulation of the app's data. This is like what we saw with that Mongo database that I showed you earlier from the Showdown slides. Someone might just get in there and, for funsies, delete your database or destroy files, mess with things, add bogus data, anything like that they just get a little kick out of. Take a screenshot, show their buddies, and that's all they got out of it, and you got a headache. Now, finding these vulnerabilities is kind of difficult. They can be found manually. In fact, they often are, but this is really time consuming. pen testers will go through and do manual testing. But like I said earlier, we do need to optimize our time and we want to work efficiently. So we do have web app scanners. There's a web app scanner like Acunetics. It's not cheap, but that's one example. And then there's Burp Suite and OS Zap. These, at least at the base level, are free. And again, so if you were at Monica Moro's talk, awesome. We're going to talk a bit more about those, and you have a head start on everyone else. Burp, also called like Burp Suite and Burp Proxy, is really cool. It's totally free to use. Well, I shouldn't say totally free. You can download it and use it for free. There's a couple of things that are only available to a premium licensed version of Burp. These are things like the scanner, and one of the cooler features is locked behind a license, and that's where it'll actually do passive scanning. You can just run Burp in the background, for example. Just have it running at all times in the background, looking at traffic, and it'll flag things just while you're on websites. You might actually start finding problems on websites you visit every day that you could then perhaps even report to the developers of that application to let them know, hey, I came to your site and I found this problem because I was running Burp in the background, and it noticed this problem and this on this page, etc. To get all that functionality is $300 a year, which is dirt cheap compared to a lot of like development tools and other security tools. But it's a super cool tool. It can do everything from spidering applications to capturing and letting you view Git and Git requests and responses. It'll do brute forcing. One thing that's really cool is it can repeat requests. You can edit requests. We're going to look at that soon. It can do a lot. It's a very powerful tool. So this is an example of Burp in action. Now, the screenshot I have here is from an example, or is an example I have from a blog post by Signal Chaos on GitHub. It's a really cool article concerning Node.js, MongoDB, and using Burp to look at server-side JavaScript injection. To put that in context, when you're using MongoDB and Node.js, right, you're not using SQL. So some people incorrectly believe that this means that SQL injection is resolved. Well, it does, but you're not invulnerable to injection attacks. You've just removed SQL from the equation and you've replaced it with JavaScript. So now we can do things called server-side JavaScript injection. So in this case, Signal Chaos had a little demo web app that asked for a year, and instead of giving it, like 1980, it gave it, some JavaScript there. And then we can see that in the response, it worked. So using Burp, he was able to see, okay, yep, it indeed was sent the JavaScript, and then in the response, even if the page didn't display it, or something didn't quite go right in the browser, you can see that in the response, it definitely looks like the JavaScript was executed. So this is a very simple example of how Burp can be used to review a request and see if it can be manipulated in some way for injection attacks. And then there's Attack Proxy, or ZAP. It's kind of a fun name. This is maintained by OWASP, and it's totally free. It's one of those tools that they use this slogan, and it's really true. It's for developers by developers. There is a podcast called Exploring Information Security, and I want to say it was September's episode. The host Timothy DeBlock does one about once a month, and I believe September's was the developer of OWASP, or at least it was in the recent past. So check it out if you're curious. He talks all about it, its origins, why he created it, and why he thinks you should use it. It's actually really simple to use. At its basic level, you can see over here just the URL to attack box and the attack button with the lightning bolt. Just enter in a URL to a web app or a web page, a single web page, an entire website, whatever, and Zap will spider it and run a battery of tests against everything it finds to see what kind of low-hanging fruit it can find, like cross-site scripting and file inclusion vulnerabilities. It's very easy to run totally unattended. You don't have to sit there and watch it or answer prompts or anything like that. You can just point it at something, click that attack button, and walk away. It does a whole lot more. It can do proxies like Burp, just like the name suggests. You can see like the request and response tabs there on the right-hand side. But this is unlike Burp, that we have to pay $300 a year for the scanner. This is a scanner you can use for free right now if you're unsure of how a scan like this works and what it'll find. So demo time. I want to show you guys Burp, SQL Map, and Zap. So let's go down here to my other workspace and look at another broken web application. So this one is just a very simple page asking, what blog post we want to view, and we can click this box and we select an author. So for example, let's select admin, and spoiler, this page has SQL injection. But depending on how familiar you are with SQL injection, how it works, you might look at this and think, well, the SQL injection doesn't seem possible because there's no text box for anyone to enter in SQL. Well, that's where Burp comes into play. So in here we have, we're going to turn on our interceptor. We have our browser set up. I'll show you. We have the browser set up to use our proxy. Burp is listening on localhost port 8080. We're using it for all, even in HTTPS. And now Burp is going to intercept the traffic. So we want to view everything by admin. Now we see the page doesn't load because the request has been captured by Burp. And we can see the request in flight. So it actually hasn't been sent yet. We can click the forward button to send it, and the page will load. But maybe we want to edit it. So we can look down here, and we see here's where the SQL request is happening. Or author equals admin. All right. So we could, just to show you how this can be edited, say we change admin to Adrian. Forward it. And look at that. We selected admin. You saw me select admin, but we actually edited the request on the fly using Burp, and we got Adrian. So one of the things that lets you do, to show you, we can actually go in here and we can look at the history. There's the request again, and we can do something like this. Send a repeater highlights, and here is, by the way, the actual request that was sent asking for Adrian. So we say, hey, let's get admin go. And we can then see the response over here. It repeated the request, and we not quite sure where the admin name will be mentioned down here, but trust me, we got the admin page. What we can actually do is also we can show response in browser. It'll make like this little Burp URL for us. Paste it in there, and there we go. We've repeated it. So that's some of the stuff Burp can do. Also, just to show you what I did here, I can copy to a file this request, and that's what I did up here. So this has our request. I'll just show it to you. Asking for admin. There's the page. There's everything. So we're actually going to feed that to SQL Map. So all I'm telling is SQL Map to read that response file. The threads just mean it'll work a bit faster. And then I'm giving it this DBS command to show me all the databases that I can find. If it finds any SQL injection, it will. So it goes through and bam. It's not quite this fast, to be fair. I've done it before to test it, so it's working on some cached information, but it is very effective. So we can see here that it resumed from a stored session. but the parameter it tested was the author, which we figured was the one that had the SQL injection. And here was the payload it used. Author equals admin, bam, and there's our SQL injection. So if we wanted to be able to repeat this or do something else with the SQL injection, we can just, okay, now we know how to do it, and we can start using Burp to edit those requests and send them to the server. But SQL Map will also go a step further. We can tell it to do things like dump the list of database names. And it did. It found 34 databases in what it identified as a MySQL database using PHP 5.3.2, Apache 2.2.14. This is running on Ubuntu. And here's all the databases right there. Now, SQL Map could also have dumped the contents of the databases. That would have taken a while, but it could go through all of those databases and give us every entry. Or maybe if we found like a user's database, something like that that was particularly interesting to us, we could dump that to see if we could get plain text passwords or just passwords that we wanted to see if we could crack, so on. So the last, like I said, is I want to show you Zap. So let's go down to our third workspace here. Now, if you'll recall, we looked at a broken web app called Ghost earlier that had the file traversal vulnerability that let us look at that password file. So this is the web page that I've given Zap to scan. So it really is, I just gave it that, said, okay, scan that. This web page, Ghost, iframe, page equals form.php, go. And it's going to start scanning. There it goes. Every once in a while, so we can see here that it already has 2 alerts for us, 2 high, 1 medium, 4 low, 0 informational, and there we go. So even though the scan's not done, it has actually already found the path traversal, and it's given us the URL we can use, page equals etc password. So actually we probably could even just use this to get the password file, unlike the much longer URL that Nick2 found. So that's also another an example of how scanners can do their scanning differently. Zap found it and says that we could probably get it just from going page to etc password, where Nick2 added a much longer request. But there's also, here for example, remote file inclusion. That's really cool. Bad for the application, good for the pen tester, or good for a malicious attacker, where it can actually load a remote file. Zap found all of this. It found an X-frame options header not set, as well as a couple of other problems. And you can see that Zap also gives you, handy descriptions and other information about all of these. So, targeted web application you're curious about, maybe back at work, something that that you've been working on your own, and Zap can help you find some of that low-hanging fruit, this stuff that's easy to find, and help you fix it. And also we can see that it's much like Burp. We can see the requests and the responses for these different options. This is the other cool thing about Zap, is that if we wanted to see the file traversal response, or the file inclusion response, you can come in here and you can look. And you can see the actual request of what it sent to the server. So some of my recommendations on how to apply what we've talked about today. I really encourage you to try out Zap on your own applications. Consider using it consistently. Use it during testing, during QA, when shortly after pushing big updates to an application to see if anything new, any new vulnerabilities have come up from that new commit, etc. I encourage you to use it as an auditing tool, as a testing tool of your own. And give Burp a try as well. It's a little bit different these things are really very similar to Fiddler, but with a twist. If you're familiar with Fiddler, you might find these tools just very interesting on their own, and hopefully they can help you find, like I said, some of the low-hanging fruit that often escapes, into the wild, and then either a pen tester or someone else finds them, a year later. The reason why you might want to do this is, if I haven't already said this enough, it finds the low-hanging fruit. It finds that stuff that slipped through, you didn't know was a problem before someone else finds it. Or maybe someone else has already found it and they just never mentioned it to you or reported it to your company. If you fix it now, it'll save you time later, I guarantee it, because when it comes time for that annual pen test, or however your company handles those, if they have them, maybe it's their very first one, whatever, when it does come time for that testing, your list that you get back will be shorter. So instead of 10 items that were found, you might only get back 2, because everything else was fixed long before, because Zap helped you find it and you were able to fix it before those same tools were used by the pen testers to stumble across those problems, and they were added to your report. The other cool thing is Zap may actually become important to job interviews for you. We've seen a big increase in interest in web app security, and some jobs now are maybe not requiring experience with Zap or AppSec experience, but they're definite pluses. So if you can go into a job interview for a new position somewhere, and actually be able to talk about Zap, it might be a big plus for you. It might swing that decision, the hiring decision, in your favor. It's between you and someone that's just about equally as qualified. It might also help you where you are right now. If you start getting into a little bit of start dipping your toe into AppSec now, it could help you out, just putting out better applications. Your applications, you'll have less findings on the penetration test reports overall, and I'm sure managers will appreciate that. And if I haven't said this 100 times already, they're really simple to use. Much harder to get into the more advanced stuff and really leverage the power of these tools. But to get started, it's very easy. Burp is actually just a jar file. Download it and run it. None of these require extra frameworks to install or have a bunch of dependencies or anything like that. They won't bug you to update them. Burp will, if there's an update, it'll bug you every time you launch Burp that there's an update and you should download it. But there won't be anything extra on your system running that you don't want. These are just files you can download and run when you want them. If I have piqued your interest at all, whether about security in general or Burp and Zap, pen testing, anything, there's a couple of local resources for you. Now, I know that some people have flown into CodeMash as far as California and who knows from where else. But these are kind of Michigan, Ohio, Indiana centric. But a lot of this applies to just about anywhere in the U.S. and probably the world. MySec, again, I'll mention them. MySec's awesome. We have some really cool people. We get great presenters come out. Like I said, there's a mix of development, security, business, and also we have a social night once a month where you can just come out and go have dinner with everyone, drink some beer, have a burger, and hang out. Same applies to OSEC, the Ohio Security Group, and there's more of these security groups all over the U.S. So you just got to find your local one. Then there's B-size conferences. These happen all over the place. These are really cool little one-day conferences, typically on a Saturday, and from 9 to 3 or something like that on a Saturday. A lot of them are free or $10, $20, $30 to get in. They'll have presenters, and usually lunch is provided, maybe, or there's you can go out to lunch with some of the people you meet. There's a lot of cool stuff. 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 they're just cool events. Not a bad way to spend a Saturday if you're curious. You don't have to go and commit to like a 4-day security conference or something like that where you're really unsure if there's going to be much for you there. So coming up, we have B-Sides Indy in Indianapolis. That's, I believe, is currently slated for March. Then there's B-Sides Cleveland in June. At least it was June last year. And then B-Sides Detroit, which is definitely in July. And to get into slightly bigger conferences, there's Converge. This is actually a very developer-friendly conference. In fact, I have been told that I should tell you all, they really want your talks. They want you to come and present. Come and bring your development talks, whatever they are, to Converge. They want diversity there. It is kind of considered a security conference, but there's a lot of developers show up. The Detroit area is full of tech people of all types. So it's a really cool crowd and a great conference. And it's also just before B-Sides Detroit. They're almost like one event. So it's like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday thing. So that's in July as well. And then there's Circle CityCon. And this is in June in Indy. This is a 3-day conference, 4 days. It is a security conference, but it's a really cool crowd. Great people. You can come, hang out, talk to people. They have cool parties in the evenings. And at least last year, and I believe this is something they want to continue every year, they have really cool training sessions. Last year, for example, if you saw Jack Daniels talk while he was here at CodeMash, he last year gave training on mixing drinks, where he taught everyone how to make like a proper mixed drinks. And then there was e-textiles, where people got to wear wearable, like light up, like Arduino powered clothing and hats or shirts and ties and stuff like that, as well as actual security workshops and development workshops on how to develop for Arduino, or how to start social engineering. It was a lot like the pre-compiler days here at CodeMash. So definitely check those out. These are, I think, really safe options in kind of the Midwest region. If you are curious about security, you want to learn more, but you don't want to commit too hard to going to a really big conference. And then there's, of course, the Web Application Hacker's Handbook. It is like a Bible-sized book. It's huge, but it has a ton of awesome information. Monica Morrow also recommended this in her talk. One quick note on that: if you were there and you saw it, the picture she had in her slide had a yellow cover. It was black and had kind of like a yellow explosion at the bottom. That is version 1. There is a version 2 now. Looks very similar to that, but it's blue instead of yellow, and it kind of has a little 2 on it. So make sure you get version 2. It's the latest one. And then there's also the Bug Hunters methodology. This isn't a book or anything. It's something you can look up online. That is a rough methodology, kind of like the attacker's methodology that we talked about earlier, for how some people go about trying to find bugs in applications, even going as far as like reverse engineering, more than just web apps, but like actual software, trying to find bugs to, whether they're trying to get a CVE number for their name, assigned to their name, or they just are curious. But that might give you a better idea of how other people are looking for problems like this. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. It was a pleasure to be here at CodeMash, and I hope everyone was able to learn something, and I kept you all interested throughout. Now, this is also where I have to admit that even though I said here at CodeMash a lot, you'll notice that it's really quiet. That's because even though I actually had a microphone shipped to me at the Kalahari Resort for CodeMash, and I had everything set up very carefully, I never hit the record button. And I forgot until I got about 5 slides in. And I realized it was not worth it to put everything on hold and click start recording when it would be missing for the first part of the presentation. So unfortunately, I don't have the questions. And there was like 10 or 15 minutes of really great questions that won't be in this recording. And that's really unfortunate. I'm sorry for that. But I definitely wanted to make good on my promise of getting a recording of this up. And I rehearsed this and practiced this talk so much that it's just kind of ingrained in me to now say here at CodeMash and that sort of thing. So if you were at the talk, thank you so much for coming out. If this is the first time you heard the talk, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, or some people actually found my website and used the contact form there. I am actually already receiving questions via Twitter and email on the talk, so please feel free to reach out. I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. And if you're even hearing this long after CodeMash, same thing applies. Feel free to reach out and get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks.